He used his tenure as a shield and my silence as a weapon. I trusted him, admired him, until the comments turned to threats and my dreams became nightmares. For months, I spiraled ashamed, alone, watching him smile like nothing happened. But I wasn't done, not even close. I met him on my first day of grad school, tall, confident, with a laugh that made people lean in. He had that type of presence that made every insecure 20-something shrink or swell, depending on how he looked at you. And when he looked at me, I swelled. "Ah, you're the one with the MIT undergrad. Read your work," he said, shaking my hand like I was already somebody. It was the first time in weeks I didn't feel like I'd made a mistake coming here. Everyone called him R. Never Professor R, like he wasn't just tenured faculty, but some mysterious, intellectual demigod who walked between classrooms and myth. Students buzzed about him. He had this way of making you feel chosen when he spoke to you, like the future of academia itself rested in your hands, if only you stayed in his orbit. So, of course, I did. The first time I stayed after class, it wasn't even intentional. I was slow packing up, and he asked if I had time to talk about my thesis idea. 15 minutes turned to 40, then an hour. Then the lights flickered overhead, and the janitor peeked in. "You're going to be one to watch," R said, scribbling a note in my book before handing it back. "Come see me during office hours. Or after. I don't mind." The note, it just said, "Let's build something big together." That night, I couldn't stop smiling. But I should have known. Should have listened. Because even then, the warnings were there, hidden like splinters under skin. "Just be careful with R," a second year whispered as we crossed paths in the hallway. "He gets intense." When I asked what she meant, she just shook her head and said, "He plays favorites, and when you're not the favorite anymore, things get ugly." But he wasn't intense with me. He was encouraging, charismatic, effortlessly brilliant, and I needed someone like that, someone who made me feel like I was more than a collection of imposter syndrome and sleep-deprived delusions. The first gift came during midterms. I walked into my shared office and there it was on my desk. A leather-bound journal with a fountain pen tucked in the loop. No note, just anonymous enough to deny, just personal enough to shiver through me. I asked around. No one admitted to leaving it, but when I thanked R for recommending my latest paper for publication, he smiled and said, "A writer like you needs good tools. Inspiration should always be within reach." My stomach dropped, not in fear, in flattery. He saw me. A week later, I started skipping meals to spend time in his office. We'd talk theory, career paths, the politics of publishing. He'd lean back in his chair, arms behind his head, and ask, "You ever think about teaching full-time, not just being in academia, but defining it?" I said yes. Of course I said yes. And every time I stood to leave, he'd hover at the door just a second too long. The kind of pause that makes your skin itch. But I ignored it, chalked it up to admiration, old school charm. Then came the conference. He invited me to present on a panel. "Big opportunity," he said. "Not everyone gets this invite." He covered my hotel, arranged the travel, all through department funding, he claimed. We checked in at the front desk at the same time. He handed over his credit card and said, "Make sure the rooms are next to each other." That night, I spent 3 hours perfecting my slides, hands shaking from caffeine. At around midnight, there was a knock on my door. I froze, opened it halfway. It was R. No. Jacket. Tie loosened, a glass of scotch in one hand. "Thought you might want to toast the big day." I stared at him, unsure what to say. He grinned. "Or not. Totally your call." I lied. Said I was exhausted. Said I'd toast tomorrow. He chuckled. Said, "You'll learn to celebrate the wins while they're still warm," and walked away. But I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, during the panel, he introduced me like I was his protege. "Brilliant," he said to the audience. "One to watch. She reminds me of a younger me." People clapped. I smiled. And I hated myself for smiling. Because I wasn't sure anymore if I was being mentored or groomed. Back on campus, everything changed. Or maybe I just started seeing it clearly. He began complimenting my outfits, telling me I looked too young to be this sharp. He started touching my arm when he laughed, leaning over my shoulder when I typed. Once, during a late-night work session, he brushed my hair behind my ear and said, "You're beautiful when you're focused." My chest locked up, but I laughed. Because what else was I supposed to do? I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I could handle it. But the truth is, I was scared, not of him exactly, but of what it would mean if I admitted something was wrong. Because then I'd have to leave the program, lose his recommendation, kill my career before it ever began. One night, I stayed late grading papers. He passed by my door and stopped. "You're always here after hours," he said. "So are you." He chuckled. "Guess we're both obsessed." He leaned against the frame, watched me for too long, then added, "You ever think about how much easier life would be if we didn't have to pretend?" I didn't respond, just looked at the stack of papers, willing myself to disappear. He took a step into the room. I mean, I know we're professionals. I'd never do anything to jeopardize that. But you feel it too, don't you? My throat burned. He walked closer, stopped a few feet from me. You don't have to. Answer. I think about you. A lot. I stood up, said I had to go. He stepped back, smiled again. That same too white smile that used to feel like sunshine and now felt like acid. Of course, he said. Wouldn't want anyone to get the wrong idea. The air between us turned electric, charged with something that felt like a threat. I left, took the stairs, ran 3 blocks before I realized I was crying. Back at my apartment, I locked the door, shut the blinds, and sat on the bathroom floor whispering to myself, it wasn't that bad. Nothing happened. He didn't touch. You. Nothing happened. But something had happened. A door had opened, and on the other side of it was a man who believed he owned me now. Because I hadn't stopped him, because I'd smiled, because I'd stayed. I didn't know what to do, who to tell. I'd built my entire future around this program, this professor, this illusion of being safe. And now, I couldn't even sleep without hearing his voice in my head. You feel it too, don't you? Yes, I felt it, and it made my skin crawl. It was a Wednesday, I remember, because I'd spilled coffee on my sleeve that morning and debated skipping his class altogether. Something in me, a quiet ache, was already learning to flinch at the sound of his voice. But I went anyway, because I was terrified of what would happen if I didn't. He was lecturing on power dynamics in institutional settings, ironically. The class buzzed like normal. My pen trembled slightly as I wrote. When I turned in my paper at the end of the session, he barely looked at it before saying, "Stay for a moment." It wasn't a question. The room emptied slowly. I could feel their eyes on me, some with curiosity, others with that subtle warning. I now understood too late. He waited until we were alone before stepping closer. You're tense, he said. I didn't answer. I know things have been complicated. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. Still, I didn't speak, just nodded. That's never been my intention, he said, reaching out. His hand touched my back, just above the waistline. You're important to me. And I froze. I didn't scream, didn't shove him, didn't even move. I just stood there, my breath caged inside my ribs, while his hand rested against me like it belonged there. He stepped back after a beat, too long a beat, and smiled like nothing had happened. There, that wasn't so bad, was it? I remember the heat creeping up my neck, not from embarrassment, from shame. I wanted to disappear. He turned toward his desk and picked up his briefcase like it was any other day. You're free to go, he said, not looking at me. I walked out like a ghost. That night, I didn't tell anyone, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. How do you explain a moment like that? How do you put into words the way someone can take something as simple as touch and make it feel like ownership? I ran my hands under scalding water, hoping the sting would replace the memory. It didn't. From then on, everything shifted. He stopped being the charming mentor in public. Instead, he watched me, closely, silently. I'd walk into the seminar and feel his eyes, tracking me across the room. When I spoke, he'd interrupt. When I didn't, he'd say, "You're unusually quiet today. Are you all right?" Every interaction felt like a test I didn't study for. In his office, he started forgetting to keep the door open. "We're just colleagues," he'd say. No. Need for theatrics. When I hesitated to meet with him, my inbox filled with red flags. "We need to talk about your progress. I'm concerned about your thesis direction. This program isn't designed to accommodate emotional instability." Emotional instability. That was the phrase that kept me up at night. Because I knew what he was doing. He was building a narrative, one he could use later. If I spoke up, he'd already laid the groundwork. She was fragile. She misinterpreted my guidance. She was failing anyway. And the worst part, I started to believe it. I stopped contributing in class. Stopped submitting drafts. My work. My passion began to rot under the weight of his shadow. My friends noticed. One asked, "Are you okay?" I said I was tired. Another said, "You're not still meeting with R, are you?" I smiled and said, "Of course not." And then went to his office the next day, like clockwork. I wish I could say the next moment was worse, that it escalated into something unambiguously violent. But it didn't. He didn't pin me to the wall or say anything, obviously illegal. That's the thing, with men like him, they're too smart for that. What he did was slower, sicker. He asked me personal questions, pressed his knee against mine under the desk, made jokes about needing a glass of wine before grading my work. When I didn't laugh, he'd lean in and whisper, "Lighten up." Once, he said, "You'll never make it in this field if you can't handle a little pressure." And I knew he wasn't talking about pressure, he was talking about control. I felt like a lab rat in a maze he'd built. Worse, I felt complicit, because I kept showing up, kept playing along, kept letting the silence drown out the scream. I wasn't ready to release. But something in me cracked the day he sent an email with the subject line, "Let's get dinner and talk thesis." I stared at it for hours. Not a meeting. Dinner. I knew what it meant, knew what he was trying to blur, knew that if I said yes, the next time he touched me, it would be worse. I didn't respond. 2 days later, I got a formal warning from the department for falling behind on key academic benchmarks. The timing wasn't a coincidence. He was tightening the leash. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and practiced saying it out loud. He touched me. He harassed me. He is hurting me. Each sentence felt like a confession, not of what he did, but of how long I let it happen. I punched the counter so hard my knuckles split open, and I made a decision. I printed every email, every comment I'd saved, every text he sent. When he got too comfortable, I created a folder, labeled it insurance. But I didn't take it to admin, not yet, because I knew what they'd say. I'd already heard it in whispers from other girls who tried. They'd call me emotional, say I was confused, that nothing criminal had occurred. I needed more, so I waited, watched, plotted, because if I was going to take him down, I'd need more than the truth. I'd need evidence. I rehearsed it for days. Alone in my apartment, standing in front of my fridge, I imagined the entire scene, how I'd sit across from the department chair, how I'd lay out my folder, how I'd start with the most factual incidents and save the worst for last. I told myself it would go like this: shock, then concern, then swift and righteous action. But I was wrong. It started on a Thursday morning after a sleepless night. Spent rereading every email he'd ever sent me. I'd highlighted the phrases that made my stomach turn, underlined the ones that hinted, barely veiled at threats. I dressed carefully, conservative but confident, no room for misinterpretation, no excuse to question my tone or presentation. Just facts. The chair of the department, Dr. Ellison, had been with the university for over 2 decades. He wore bow ties, collected vintage maps, and had a photo of R smiling and mid-laugh on the shelf behind his desk. That photo was the first thing I saw when I walked in. He gestured for me to sit, cheerful. Everything okay? You looked pale in seminar this week. I need to talk to you about Professor R, I said, gripping the folder so hard the plastic bent beneath my fingers. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed slightly. I opened the folder, spread the printouts across his desk, emails, a few texts, my timeline. I'd even transcribed some of the things he said word for word, with date and time. For 10 minutes, I walked him through everything. When I finished, he didn't say anything right away, just leaned back and glanced at the papers. Like I'd handed him a crossword puzzle he wasn't in the mood to solve. Finally, he said, "And you believe this constitutes harassment?" I blinked. Yes. He nodded slowly, like someone tolerating a child's tantrum. "Look," he said, tapping one of the emails. "I see how this might read as overly familiar. But you're both adults. Tenured faculty and graduate students often have close working relationships. These are long hours, intense mentorships." I stared at him. He touched me. Where? On my back, on my arm, knee, once. But it wasn't just the physical contact. It's everything. The pressure, the emails, the retaliation when I pulled back. He sighed. "Miss Patel, I'm not minimizing your feelings. I'm sure it's been a stressful semester. These programs are notoriously hard on mental health." "I'm not confused," I snapped. "I'm not imagining this. No." "One said you were," he replied calmly. "But from what I see here, I don't have evidence of misconduct. It's ambiguous at best." Ambiguous? He said it like that should be the end of it. I leaned forward. "I'm not the only one." His eyes flicked up. That got his attention. "Other students?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm not sure how many, but there are others. One graduated last year. She told me he did similar things. We're trying to compile everything. Build a case." He held up a hand. "You need to be very careful with that. Allegations without clear evidence can ruin reputations. Yours included." There it was, the unspoken threat. He stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Why don't we revisit this once the semester ends? Take some time. Focus on your coursework. I'm sure this will all feel less urgent in a few weeks." I didn't move. "Is that it?" I asked. He gave me a tight smile. "That's all, Ms. Patel." I gathered my folder and left. Outside the office, the hallway was empty, cold. Every step echoed like I'd left a part of myself back there still sitting, still begging to be believed. "That night," I cried, "not because I wasn't believed, because I was. And they just didn't care. I stopped going to his classes. My advisor switched me to a different seminar, citing scheduling conflicts. I heard from a friend in the program that R had mentioned me in class. "Some students can't handle the pressure," he said, shrugging. "It's unfortunate." And just like that, the rumors started. One girl pulled me aside after a study group and whispered, "I heard you tried to get him fired, that you're mad about your thesis." Another said, "You shouldn't go around accusing people. You don't want to look unstable." Unstable. That word followed me for weeks, in meetings, in emails, in the glances people gave me when I entered a room. I started to shrink into myself, became quieter, more cautious. Because I knew what they were doing. They weren't just protecting him, they were quarantining me. One by one, the faculty stopped inviting me to research meetings. My co-advisor, who had once promised to support my dissertation no matter what, told me we'd have to pause our work together until this blows over. It wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. I was being erased by the third week. I stopped going to campus altogether, logged into classes remotely, stopped returning calls, stopped eating. I sat in my apartment surrounded by stacks of books I couldn't bring myself to open, thinking, maybe this is what he wanted. Maybe if I disappear, it'll end. A message appeared, anonymous, from the same student forum I'd posted on a few weeks earlier, back when I was still testing the waters. I believe you. He did it to me too. My heart stopped. I replied instantly, carefully, and soon she was emailing me directly. She told me about his mentorship. The same pattern, the same phrases, the same escalation when she pulled away. And then she said, there's more of us. 3 more. All from different years, different departments, each one with their own version of the same story. We started meeting in secret, off campus, in quiet cafes and parked cars. We compared timelines, language, evidence, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel insane. I felt furious because he hadn't just hurt me. He had a system, a method, and the university had let it happen over and over again. One of the women had gone to the board 5 years ago. She had emails, recordings, but the school had swept it under the rug, cited lack of sufficient documentation, gave her a small grant to pursue alternate academic pathways, and politely nudged her out the door. They knew, they had always known. That night, we made a pact. No more whispering, no more shame. We would collect everything, archive it, build a timeline that even the administration couldn't ignore, because if they were going to protect him, we were going to bury him. There's a kind of rage that doesn't scream, it whispers. That was the feeling I had the first night we all met in the back room of a cafe near campus. Just 4 women, all in different stages of grief, recovery, confusion, all victims of the same man. It didn't feel like a support group, it felt like survivors comparing escape routes. One of them, Sarah, was already working at a think tank in DC. She'd graduated 3 years ago. Her story? Practically identical to mine, except instead of touch, he'd used threats, said she needed to prove loyalty to get her grant recommendation, said she owed him for his investment in her future. Another, Janice, had audio recordings, not complete ones, but enough. You're so pretty when you're focused, R said on one clip. Same words he whispered to me that night in his office. Same tone, same game. It was like hearing my trauma played back through someone else's lungs. And then there was Ellie, quiet, shaking, still in the program. She hadn't told anyone until now, but her eyes, God, her eyes held everything I had buried. She said he told her he had a soft spot for strays. She'd been homeless during her undergrad. That comment wasn't flirty, it was predatory. We spent hours trading stories, drawing connections. The jokes he recycled, the compliments wrapped in commands. The times he retaliated with bad grades or vague threats when we tried to pull away. Each of us had blamed ourselves at some point. Each of us had tried to minimize it. And each of us had wondered silently, shamefully, was it really that bad? Until now. Until we sat in the same room and realized his entire legacy was built on our silence. Ellie pulled out her laptop and opened a spreadsheet she'd started. Dates, classes, incidents. We filled it in together. My hand shook as I added my entries. There were so many overlaps, patterns we hadn't seen until now, emails sent at the same time of year, phrases he reused, the mentorship, dinners, the late-night meetings, the consistent escalation and fallout. It was like a predator's playbook, and we were finally reading it aloud. Sarah leaned back in her chair and said, "This doesn't stay here. We document, we organize, and we burn his career to the fucking ground." She said it like a prayer. So we did. Over the next few weeks, we gathered everything. We created a shared drive, encrypted and password protected. Screenshots, emails, call logs, photos of texts, audio clips, testimonies. We started referring to ourselves as the Mosaic team because when you looked at one of us alone, it looked like noise. But when you put us together, it formed a picture. Clear, inarguable, devastating. We even had timelines of his previous university positions. Janice found archive faculty bios. Sarah tracked down a woman he mentored 7 years ago who now worked in Oregon. She cried when we called her. I thought I was the only one. It was heartbreaking. But it was also fuel. Still, we knew none of this would matter unless we brought it to someone who couldn't ignore it. The Title IX office was the obvious route, but we were wary. They had a reputation for losing paperwork, for dragging out cases until victims gave up. We needed a parallel path. So I leaked the audio. I made a burner account, posted it on a private student subreddit with the title, "Guess which tenured professor likes to blur lines?" It went viral in 6 hours. By the end of the day, it had made its way onto Twitter. By the end of the week, 2 student-run publications were calling it the fall of Professor R. Campus buzzed. Students started whispering in hallways. More women came forward. One girl said she dropped out in 2015 because of him. Another said he made her rewrite her thesis 5 times before she finally agreed to have dinner with him. We created an intake form, asked every woman to log her experience, anonymously or otherwise. By the end of the month, we had over 40 entries. Some were graphic, others were subtle, psychological. But all of them told the same story. R had used his power, position, and charm to harass, manipulate, and destroy. And the university had let him. Because he published, because he brought prestige, because he was good at covering his tracks until now. Our final document was 89 pages long. We called it The Pattern, and we delivered it to the Title IX office in person. 4 of us walked in, folders in hand, eyes clear. The secretary didn't even look surprised, just said, "We've been expecting you." Of course they had. When the media attention hit, their tune changed. Now they were deeply concerned. Now they were taking these allegations seriously. Now they were committed to a thorough investigation. But we didn't stop there. We sent the file to every university R had ever taught at, every conference board he sat on, every journal editorial team he contributed to. We sent it to reporters. We didn't wait for permission anymore. We were done being polite. 1 week later, the university announced he was on administrative leave pending investigation. A month later, he resigned. No public statement, no apology, just gone. But I didn't feel relief. I felt hollow, because for years he'd operated with impunity, and no one stopped him. How many women did he hurt? How many stayed silent? How many believed, like I did, that it was easier to survive than to fight? That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I thought about the first time he touched me, that subtle, almost imperceptible invasion, and how I'd told myself it wasn't that bad, it was that bad, and I would never tell myself that lie again. It wasn't enough that he resigned. We weren't interested in silence sealed by NDAs or the university's PR-approved line that Professor R had chosen to pursue other opportunities. Because we knew how that story ends. They leave quietly, wait a year, then reappear in another department, another university, with another batch of students who don't know what they're walking into. That wasn't happening this time, not if we had anything to do with it. We got strategic, cold, tactical. Sarah, who'd worked on political campaigns, taught us how to think like a machine. No emotion, just pressure, sustained and precise. We called every Title IX coordinator from every school on our CV. "Hi, I'm part of a coalition of former students who are gathering formal complaints against a former professor. Would you like a copy of the compiled report before it becomes part of a larger media investigation?" Polite, professional, loaded. We CC'd department heads, deans, alumni boards, journal editors, anyone with pull. Then we tracked job postings, guest lectures, adjunct rotations, anywhere R was rumoured to be applying. They got a dossier, and we weren't anonymous anymore. We signed our names. Because we weren't scared of him anymore. We wanted them to know, this man carries consequences now. That was the moment things shifted. When the fear started to move from our bodies into his, we could tell, because he started fighting back. He sent emails to some of us, vague, legally crafted messages filled with phrases like libel and cease and desist. He claimed he was the victim of a smear campaign, that we were misrepresenting a mutually respectful academic dynamic. But we had the receipts. We'd built an entire archive, emails, messages, timelines, a spreadsheet of dates, locations, even seating charts. We had voice memos, testimonies, photos of pages from journals where he'd written in the margins, "Meet with her alone," and we had the victims. So many of us now, dozens. It didn't feel like justice yet, but it was momentum. And when the national news picked up the story, it went nuclear. There was a headline, "Celebrated professor accused by over 40 students, a pattern of power and silence." His face was everywhere. The photo the university had proudly used on their brochures now plastered across exposés, think pieces, and Twitter threads. More women emailed us. One from a community college where he'd taught early in his career, another from a non-profit conference. One woman said she was 17 when he mentored her during a pre-college program. 17! I wanted to burn the world down. Instead, we kept building the case. That's when we learned something important. Universities don't act unless there's a liability. So we became one. We connected with legal aid. Found a civil rights lawyer who had taken down predatory professors before. She read our documents and said, "This is airtight." We filed a formal legal complaint, not just against the university, for negligence, for allowing a hostile environment, for endangering students. The university panicked. They offered a mediation session, a settlement, non-disclosure agreements, money. It was a lot, more than I'd ever seen on a single check. And for a moment, I considered it. I really did. Not because I wanted the money, but because I was tired. So tired. Of being angry, of reliving it, of opening my inbox every morning and reading another story of another girl who thought she was alone. But then Ellie texted, just a photo, a note someone had slipped under her door that said, "You're next." She lived alone. She didn't even cry when she called, just whispered, "I'm scared." And I remembered. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about protection. So I tore up the settlement offer. We went public. We held a press conference outside the university gates, all of us standing shoulder to shoulder, arms locked. Reporters asked questions, some respectful, some voyeuristic. Why didn't you report sooner? Why didn't you leave the program? Why didn't you fight back? Sarah stepped up to the mic, looked them dead in the eye, because the system was designed to make sure we didn't. And then read the names. Every single woman who gave consent to be named. 43 voices that had once been whispers, now thunder. The next day, 4 universities formally banned him from applying. 2 journals removed his name from editorial boards. A speaking engagement at a tech conference was cancelled. Then another, and another. His LinkedIn disappeared. So did his Twitter. He went dark. But the work didn't stop. We created a fund for survivors. Sarah got it sponsored by a women's foundation. We launched a podcast. We started consulting with other universities on how to identify patterns before they metastasize. And slowly, quietly, my nightmares started to change. I stopped dreaming about his office, his voice, the emails. Instead, I dreamed of doors opening, rooms filled with women who refused to be silent. I saw Ellie smile again. I saw Sarah sleep through the night. I saw myself standing in front of a lecture hall teaching, unafraid. It didn't fix everything. I still had panic attacks sometimes. I still hated being touched, but I could breathe again. And that was more than survival. That was reclamation. He used the system to protect himself for years. So we rewired it. We built a coffin out of his own playbook, and we nailed it shut page by page, name by name, because no one gets to be a monster and also keep their legacy. Not anymore. I thought once he resigned it would be over, but predators don't go down quietly. They lurk. They test the locks. They wait for the dark to stretch just long enough for a second chance. It started with a voicemail. Blocked number. I almost didn't listen, but something in me, a sick, heavy instinct pressed play anyway, static. Then his voice. If I go down, you're coming with me. 10 words, just 10. But they hit like a cold hand around my throat. I stared at my phone, heart beating too fast to swallow. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just stood there in my kitchen, listening to it again and again and again. He didn't say his name. Didn't have to. Every syllable carried the same smug venom I'd heard in his office, in his emails, in the way he used to look at me like I was a pet. He could discipline. I saved the voicemail, filed a police report. They took it under consideration, which meant nothing. Days later, my LinkedIn was flooded with comments, anonymous profiles, no photos, generic names, "You're a liar, jealous little girl, women like you ruin good men." I disabled the comments, changed my privacy settings, but the internet is a porous wall. Things slip through, emails, DMs, one person even found my old high school address and sent a postcard that just said, "Slut." I started sleeping with my lights on. I kept pepper spray in every coat pocket. I changed my route to the grocery store. Every stranger's glance felt like a threat. But the worst moment came 2 weeks later when I opened my front door and found it. A box. No label, no return address. Just sitting on my welcome mat like it belonged there. Inside, a dead rat. Wrapped in one of my research articles. The one he used to praise. I stood frozen in my doorway, staring down at it. I couldn't scream. Couldn't breathe. I called the police. They showed up, took photos, asked if I had any known enemies. I gave them his name. They said, "We'll look into it." I knew what that meant. So I started documenting everything, every message, every missed call, every fake account. I created a backup folder, labeled "just in case," because if anything happened to me, I wanted people to know. Still, it wore me down. I stopped eating, couldn't keep food down even when I tried. Sleep became a battlefield. I'd doze off and jolt awake, heart pounding, sure someone was in the room. Therapy helped. A little. I found a woman who specialized in trauma, told her everything. She didn't flinch, didn't ask if I was exaggerating. She just said, "You're not crazy, you're hunted." That word, it landed harder than I expected, because that's what it felt like he was stalking the edges of my life, waiting for me to break. But I didn't. Not this time. I bought a security camera, got a lawyer on speed dial, recorded every interaction, sent copies of everything to Sarah and the others. I refused to disappear again. Then, one night, I was walking home from a speaking event, a panel on women's rights in academia. I'd stood on stage, steady, powerful, told a room full of strangers how we took him down. Afterward, a student came up to me, barely 20, tears in her eyes. She whispered, "You saved me." And I believed her. But as I crossed the parking lot, I noticed a car idling nearby. No headlights, just parked. The windows were tinted. It didn't move when I walked by, didn't leave until I entered my building. I reported it. Again and again, nothing. So I called a meeting with the Mosaic team. We sat on Zoom, faces lined with exhaustion, fire still in our eyes. "He's escalating," I said. "He's scared," Sarah replied, "which means we're close." We decided to go public again, not with more evidence, with the aftermath. We told our stories raw, unfiltered. We named the retaliation, the rat, the voicemail, the stalking. We named the system's failure to protect us after the headlines faded. Because people think justice ends with a resignation. It doesn't. It only ends when the fear ends. And mine wasn't over yet. That article, "What Happens After You Take Down a Predator," went viral again. But this time, the tone shifted. People didn't just praise us, they protected us. A non-profit donated money for personal security systems, a lawyer offered pro bono services to anyone being harassed. Even strangers sent messages saying, "We see you, we've got you." And then, the police called. "We found something," they said. Turns out, one of the anonymous accounts that threatened me had been traced back to a device registered to R's brother. A weak attempt at a proxy, but enough. They opened a formal investigation, and for the first time in months, I exhaled. He was losing ground. Every time he tried to silence me, I got louder. Every time he threatened me, I got stronger. Because I had what he'd never have again: truth, witnesses, and a legacy that didn't need to hide behind tenure. I still check over my shoulder sometimes, still flinch when a car slows near the curb. But I'm not hunted anymore. I'm prepared. He taught me how dangerous silence can be. So now I speak, and I don't stop. Not until there's no room left for men like him to hide. You'd think the day would feel triumphant, that I'd wake up to fanfare, or at least a little relief, some taste of justice. But all I felt was nothing. It came in the form of an email, not from the university, not from a lawyer, just a quiet notice from a national academic consortium we'd flagged months ago. After review, Professor R has been permanently barred from consideration for any future affiliation. No apology, no acknowledgement of the damage, just a line, a final sentence in a story they'd helped write in silence. I sat at my desk and reread the email 6 times, then opened the group chat. "He's banned," I typed. Sarah replied instantly. "One down." Ellie sent a string of exclamation marks. Then, I'm crying in the bathroom at work. Janice just sent a voice memo. "He'll never be near another student again." And still, I felt hollow. Not because I wanted more, because I realized I would never get back what he took. I'd spent months chasing this moment, gathering evidence, testifying, watching my life unravel in the name of justice, and now that it was here, it felt like ashes. I went for a walk that afternoon, trying to shake it off. The air was cold, sharp against my skin. I kept thinking of the first time I'd walked to his office, heart pounding with hope. I remembered the shoes I wore, black flats, slightly too tight, and how I'd practiced what I'd say to impress him. And I remember how small I felt when I left that room for the last time. That version of me is gone now, replaced by someone who triple locks her doors. Someone who keeps a folder of threats, just in case. Someone who measures silence in units of survival. I passed the student center and saw a new flyer pinned to the bulletin board. "Consent and Boundaries in Academia, a discussion." It listed guest speakers, panelists. My name was at the bottom. I stared at it for a long time, and then, out of nowhere, I started laughing. Not a joyful laugh, not even a bitter one, just disbelief, because somehow I had become the cautionary tale and the case study, the symbol and the survivor. I went home and opened my laptop, typed his name into Google. Every article was still there. Dozens. Accused, esteemed professor of harassment. The ivory tower isn't safe for women, and it never was. The girls he mentored fought back and won. His legacy was shattered. But mine, I wasn't sure what was left of it. I stared at my unfinished thesis for 20 minutes. I hadn't touched it in weeks. Every time I opened it, his voice echoed behind my eyes. "Is this your best work? I expected more from you. Don't waste my time." I closed the document again, because even without him in the room, he was still there. still threaded through every footnote, every paragraph. That's what people don't understand about men like him. They don't just hurt you in the moment. They infest the things you love, your work, your ambition, your future. I got into the shower and sat on the floor, letting the water hit my back. And I thought, what now? The war was over. But the wounds were still open. The next day, I got a message from a freshman. She said she'd been in the audience at one of our talks, said her TA made a comment that made her uncomfortable, and for the first time in her life, she told someone. Because of us. Because of me. You saved me, she wrote. I hope you never stop talking. I sat with that message for a long time, because it reminded me this isn't about feeling victorious. It's about making sure no one else feels as alone as we did. So I got up, I opened my thesis, and I started to write. Not because I was healed, but because I was still here. Because silence didn't get to win, not anymore. The university never apologized. He never admitted anything, but he'll never teach again, never mentor another student, never sit behind a desk and play God with someone's future. And that's something. I don't feel victorious. I feel unfinished. But maybe that's okay. Maybe justice doesn't come in neat endings. Maybe it comes in moments like a student whispering, thank you, or a flyer on a bulletin board that tells the next girl, she's not alone. Maybe it's not about the day he was banned. Maybe it's about every day after. The ones we get to live without fear. The ones we reclaim inch by inch, voice by voice. And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing looks like. He used to talk about legacy. In our early meetings, he'd lean back in that leather chair, steeple his fingers, and muse about impact like he was carving his name into marble. He wanted to be remembered, revered. He wanted his work cited, his theories canonized, his voice immortalized in classrooms long after he was gone. But legacy isn't just what you publish. It's how people remember the sound of your name, and I made sure his name no longer meant brilliance. It meant warning. After he disappeared from academia, I was offered a role on the university's ethics advisory board. At first, I thought it was a joke, a PR stunt, another attempt at performance instead of accountability. But I accepted, because if I didn't take the seat, someone else would. Someone quieter, safer, easier to manage. And I was done being easy to manage. Our first meeting was in a boardroom with too much glass and not enough truth. They went around the table, introducing themselves. Deans, donors, one former provost, and then me. The woman who brought the house down. They didn't quite know where to look when I spoke, but I made them listen. We don't need more policies, I said. We need teeth. We need a system that doesn't just respond to complaints. It prevents the behavior in the first place. Some of them nodded. Some shifted uncomfortably. All of them knew who I was. Good, because I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to make sure no one like him ever climbed that high again. Outside of meetings, I started speaking at freshman orientations, not as a cautionary tale, but as a warning siren. I told them the truth. That charming professor, the one who flatters you, who offers extra mentoring late at night, who calls you brilliant, then brushes your arm like it's nothing. Watch him. Write everything down. Don't wait to feel scared before you start protecting yourself. Some faculty complained, said I was fostering paranoia. I called it arming the next generation, and they listened. They always listened, even when it hurt, especially then. One day, after a panel discussion, a girl lingered in the hallway. Thin, pale, eyes rimmed red, she handed me a folded piece of paper. I don't want to say it out loud, she whispered, but thank you, because now I know it wasn't my fault. That paper? It was a list of things a visiting scholar had said to her. Small things, untraceable on their own, but familiar. I helped her write the report. That scholar didn't make it to the next semester. The system still buckled under its own weight sometimes, still protected its own, but now it also had cracks, and in those cracks, people. Like me, planted seeds. We trained faculty, launched advocacy groups, funded scholarships for survivors who had once dropped out quietly, erased from records like they never existed. We gave them their names back, their stories, their legacy, because I refused to let him be the only one remembered. And as for R, the last I heard, he tried to apply for a remote research grant in Europe. Someone sent me the application. I forwarded the dossier. The rejection was swift. He's become a ghost now. His name no longer carries power, only consequence. But still, sometimes I dream about him. Not nightmares. Me like static, unresolved lingering. In those dreams, I'm back in his office. The chair is the same. The light's still flickering. He's talking about some philosopher I don't care about, and I'm just sitting there. But this time, I don't freeze. This time, I stand. I look him in the eye, and I say, you don't get to be a monster and also keep your legacy. Then I turn and walk out, and the door slams so loud it echoes, even in sleep, even now. Because justice isn't about punishment, it's about memory, and I remember everything.